Hi, everybody. We are the Good Doctors of Abbey Research. I am Dr. Kristen.
I am Dr. Erin.
And you are exceptionally welcome to the conversation space that you are in. We here at Abbey Research are big believers in curiosity that fuels empathy and inclusivity. We're two doctors with social science PhDs who have pursued our curiosity in a variety of ways. And one of the things that we have learned throughout the years is that honestly, curiosity is the only thing that changes the world. And being curious about the culture around you and the people that you interact with is what makes us deeper and fuller humans. So we do a lot of service around that, not only in our entire work, but specifically on our podcast and our YouTube channel, where we talk about everything from the ways that race show up in popular television shows to the Oscar movies that we think folks need to watch, to how to learn empathy from Hallmark Christmas movies. It really does run the gamut, folks. We love talking to each other. We do it all the time. We promise. We turn on all our recording devices for y'all because we also love having this conversation with you. So however you are encountering this, we do want to hear from you. Please let us know your reactions. Feel free to live DM your reactions to these conversations. You can find us across a whole host of socials. We're ABBEY, Abbey Research spelled with an E, everywhere but Snapchat and TikTok.
Yeah, we don't do those. We're not going to do those.
We are overwhelmed by the dancing.
We've got enough. You've got enough places to get a hold of us. Today we are here for our continuing coverage of Hulu's frustrating ball of nonsense that is actually called The Handmaid's Tale. It's the reason we started a YouTube channel, and we've been through the wars with a lot of you. We're here for our season 4 recap. Now, if you're just finding us because the lovely algorithm told you we have a season 4 recap in advance of season 5 coming out, you should know this is, in fact, a recap in literally name only. We do it for
thematic.
It's a thematic recap discussion. If you want a play-by-play of every episode of this season, this is not a service that we provide. There are many good folks in many places who do. So no offense if you tap out now. You've been warned. We're gonna really quickly just talk about what happened sort of in the show, and then we have a lot of thematic things to discuss and character development. So the show starts in Gilead. We've got June on the run, dying of sepsis. June
never addressed, really.
Yeah, we just dropped the sepsis ball. June and the handmaids get captured. June betrays the handmaids. The handmaids escape. Some of them get killed.
Let's pause really quick, though. Important thing in the first episode, we meet a wife named Esther.
Yes, played by McKenna Grace.
Played by McKenna Grace, who you may know from the Chris Evans movie, Gifted.
So good.
And she will come back later on in the season. So we meet her in episode 1. There are some problematic is a gentle way to put it, interactions between her and June.
Uh-huh.
But the first 2 to 3 episodes of the show are about the process of that now June has been found in the forest and is at a safe house. And let us say too, because we don't know when you're going to be watching this. This is a COVID season for sure.
Yeah.
It's really, really affected by the COVID. There are obvious episodes they filmed before a shutdown, episodes they filmed after. There's a lot of mess, some of which we feel you can absolutely chalk up to the COVID.
Yeah.
And some of which we feel is just that they're not great at coherence or consistency.
True.
Continue. So we're back that June makes a selfish decision, shocking, to enact justice her own way. Handmaids get captured.
Yes. Boy, does June make a lot of decisions for these couple days on Esther's farm.
Yep.
It's somewhere in the Gileadian countryside. But eventually we get to episode 3, which is the crossing. The handmaids are being transported to a Magdalene colony, which, if you want to know more about how disturbingly accurate that title was, you can check out our episode 3 discussion. And they get a chance to break away from Lydia and the lone guardian who is transporting 7 violently rebellious handmaids. Cool, that makes sense. And we lose Alma and Brianna, I think.
Yeah.
They get hit by the train at the crossing, and June and Janine are the only survivors. So then we get a period of 3 episodes on the way to and in Chicago. The most ridiculous thing we've ever seen on this show, perhaps, is this milk transport plot device.
Like, June hypothetically has open wounds still.
Like, festering. We saw her telling Alma about, like, they're festering.
There's no sense of time in this season, so we can't tell you how long anything's been happening. But I will tell you, of all the decisions they made, to me, the weirdest one is to transport them in a milk truck. But anyway, so they get transported in a milk truck to Chicago.
June shows up and goes, "Where's Mayday?" And your man goes, "Who's Mayday?" Because June's an idiot sometimes.
Yeah.
And then we get a couple episodes learning a little bit about what's going on in Chicago, learn a little bit about Janine. She pushes back against June, which is an important part of her development this season. We'll get into Janine when we get into character development. And the whole revenge June is real strong in these episodes, and eventually gets caught in a bombing campaign from Gilead and finds Moira.
Meanwhile, in Gilead, what has been happening is that Lawrence and Lydia are trying to get back into the good graces of Gilead. And so a huge part of, we are reminded very, very intensely that Lawrence is always on the side of Lawrence. and Lydia is always on the side of Lydia. And most of the time what Lydia wants lines up with what Gilead wants. I don't think that what Lawrence wants always lines up with what Gilead wants. But there's a lot of machinations, and some play and ways that Lawrence plays with Nick's brain and allegiances. Our favorite line is actually in these episodes, which, like, Nick says, "I would know if June was
if June was at the border. I would know if June made it to the border."
And Lawrence was like, "Would your heart glow?"
or something?
The best. But so all of this is happening, and in a way, the worlds all collide. All the storylines collide in one moment where June and Janine get caught in the campaign. Now, in the world that they have created for us, there's no way in hell that Moira would have just happened upon June. But it's television, and this is one of those weird things I will grant them. So Moira finds June in the rubble.
Yes, and we should say that, there is visits to Canada throughout the first 6 episodes. We see Nicole living with Moira and Luke. We see Emily and Moira trying to work on integrating and providing support for the
random children that arrived.
The 86 children that showed up on the Angels flight. Rita starts to get reintegrated back into society. And Moira and her lovely girlfriend, Una, are the ones that end up on an aid mission in Chicago. And so that's, Canada becomes pretty much the place at the end of the season. But we do get interspersed stories of what's going on in Canada and Luke's effort to try and find June and all of this kind of stuff, leading us up to June and Moira's nonsensical reunion.
After this is where there's almost no logic in terms of how the world we live in works. How June gets to Canada is bizarre, and essentially can fake her way through Gilead security, which makes no sense.
Nobody knows what she looks like. I'm sorry.
I mean, there's surveillance cameras everywhere, but we digress.
The surveillance state, but nobody has a picture of June Osborne. Got it.
And really, what we learn with the tugboat across the lake to Canada is that the border means nothing.
Nothing.
Because pretty soon, June, for the rest of the season, June's going to go back and forth across the border like she's doing a ShopRite run in her Magic Subaru. With no issues. A lot of the kind of things that they've been setting up for many, many years of what trauma looks like, of what Canada looks like, for some reason no longer apply in episodes 7, 8, 9, and 10.
Yeah.
So we're very confused, but we get June hypothetically reintegrating, which doesn't happen.
Bumpy road.
Get her and Luke not really knowing how to be married. We get a really interesting scene choice where they have June sexually assault Luke.
Huh? And then we never talk about it again.
Never talk about it again. There's a supposedly trauma circle where June manipulates Emily's trauma for public display of something.
To the point that the aunt involved in it dies by suicide.
And all along, we're still trying to get Hannah.
The Waterfords are still in Canada dealing with the International Criminal Court.
June testifies before the International Criminal Court. Baller episode.
Oh, so good.
Fred is convicted.
Yep.
Serena's pissed.
Uh-huh. Fred finds out
Serena's pregnant. Did we talk about that?
We didn't get to Serena being pregnant yet. Serena's pregnant. When we get to Serena in a bit more detail, we'll talk about her and Mark Twello. But in a really interesting, borders don't exist visit from the Putnams, Fred learns that Gilead is not going to support him. And so decides to turncoat, tout, as we say in Northern Ireland, and divulge Gileadian secrets in exchange for supposedly immunity, which sets us up for, a real humdinger of a final episode. A lot of movement from June, leading to the murder of Fred Waterford by said group of trauma survivors, except for Moira. And yeah,
a group of handmaids dressed in non-handmade clothing.
We did a lot of trauma.
Yep.
And displays of trauma and lack of care services and counseling for these humans in trauma in the last 3 episodes. But boy, did they have some things to say about how people process trauma and sexual violence. So that becomes a central theme of what's happening in the last 3 episodes in Canada.
So
we want to do? You want to talk about characters? You want to talk about?
Yeah, let's go to characters.
Yeah.
So let's get Serena out of the way first.
Yeah.
So Fred is Fred. I still believe that he is a true believer through and through. I respect that there are people that disagree with me, but there's no reason for him not to believe in Gilead. It's always privileged him. So he's always gotten everything he wanted. Yeah. Serena, on the other hand, I believe while was at the beginning, has now evolved into somebody who uses it for her own power, which we see with the pregnancy. But thematically, the biggest that we've got is that we're not actually sure who her baby's father is.
Yeah. I mean, and we talked about this if you watched our episode 10 discussion. Serena is such a fascinating character. Yvonne Strahovski is doing a phenomenal job. I wish we had more time with her to understand what's really going on in her brain.
Yep. Same.
We get some fantastic scenes where, June shows up and Serena begs for forgiveness. We get some fantastic scenes with her and Fred where she's manipulating him into joining forces against June and her testimony. She's manipulating him into testifying himself and turning state's evidence on Gilead. All of this stuff is fascinating. But yeah, we get a scene in episode 10 where she's being real irrationally demanding about Fred, and her and Tuello have a lot of tension. And it appears as though the show could be indicating that Tuello might be the father of the child.
Which would make more sense than Fred, since they spent 3 seasons telling us that Fred was infertile.
Spent a long time telling us that we were real sure Fred was infertile.
So that was really interesting. So that's Serena and Fred.
Yeah. I would like to bring in at this point, Bruce Miller did an Ask Me Anything, an AMA on Reddit towards the end of the season. He did get a question about Serena and whether we will see the redemption of Serena, which I thought was an interesting word. But here's what Bruce said. I don't believe in redemption. How would Serena be redeemed? How are any of us redeemed? That's quite philosophical. I think Serena rationalizes what she does. I imagine she thinks she would have no need for redemption. And I agree with that assessment. I think she does, much like most people in this show, most characters, she does what she does for Serena. For Nicole, I think she's motivated at times for that. But ultimately, when it comes down to it, Serena's just surviving.
Yeah, what I want to touch on is that somebody who is writing a show about escaping a cult does not believe in redemption. Which is a very specific worldview. And
it sure is.
One that explains a lot of his decisions. And one I don't agree with. I can tell you how any of us are redeemed. It's actually a fairly interesting question, but I don't believe anybody can be redeemed is a rough take for a showrunner about this kind of show.
Yeah, and I think it brings up, I mean, we'll get to June later because I don't think we want to talk about her right now, but I think it brings up the potential for redemption for anyone on this show. And really, like, you can pick. So does he feel that way about Lawrence? Does he feel that way about Lydia? Does he feel that way about Luke? Is everybody beyond redemption? Does redemption not exist in Bruce Miller's world on The Handmaid's Tale? I'm not sure I love that story. I'm not sure that's the story I want to see.
Because, well, this is the other thing that he also would believe that anything June is doing is justified. Because I do believe that June needs redemption from some of her choices.
Mm-hmm.
And I was hoping that we would kind of see that. But if he doesn't believe in redemption at all,
yeah,
then he's not going to tell that story. So in a way, I'm like, oh, thank you. I now know this. If I wish I'd known that going in.
Yeah. I don't think, I mean, obviously we can't talk about the potential future for Fred's character development because Fred's dead. But Joseph Fiennes continued to do a great job this season. I think everything he did as Fred made sense. Mm-hmm. He was probably the most consistent character we've got in terms of they established who he was.
Yep.
And how he behaved throughout this whole season was based entirely on how they established his character.
Totally. Yeah, no, I think he was very consistent.
None of that was surprising. All right, so we're done with the Waterfords. Where should we go next?
Let's go briefly to Lydia.
Yeah, let's talk about Lydia.
We do not believe that the show is going to try to dovetail directly into the book, The Testaments, that Hulu has acquired.
Optioned. We do not.
The Lydia of the show and the Lydia of the book are very disparate.
Mm-hmm.
If you would like to hear more of our thoughts on that, we're happy to expand. I think we said it on an episode or two, but so the Lydia here, I think had a very difficult time having power taken from her.
Oh, yeah.
A bit of a breakdown. June is her Everest. Like, June is the thing she has to conquer.
Mm-hmm.
And when she can't conquer June, she can conquer Janine.
Yeah. And it should be stated, we didn't quite get to it. Janine does not escape from Chicago. Janine is captured after the bombing and taken back to Gilead. We find her in episodes 7 and 8 in the Red Center.
Yep.
With Esther, the wife from the first few episodes on the farm. Esther is rightfully so very angry. We don't know if she's angry at June. We both kind of think she should be, because she wouldn't be in this position if June hadn't insisted on taking out those commanders at the country club Jezebel's. Well, we don't know, but June certainly put them all at risk with that decision. I don't think they're going to waste the acting caliber of McKenna Grace by not having her come back in the 5th season if she agrees to. I really hope she does. We got some fascinating insights into her use of hunger strikes I could talk about for days. But that is where we leave. We're not sure where we left Janine and Esther because they weren't in episode 10 at all.
No, I mean, where we left Lydia is that she's back in power.
Yeah.
But that power, we are shown dissension among the ants.
Yeah.
And so that's an interesting thing. But she still can press a lot of Janine's buttons. Now, Bruce Miller had something to say about Janine.
He did. Because I think a lot of people were looking at where the show was going in earlier parts of the season and, making connections to what happens in the Testaments. And if you guys followed our coverage through the season, you'll know Dr. Kristen read the Testaments, which is effectively as good as me reading it too, because she told me what I needed to know. Our good friend, honorary good doctor, Dr. Nadine Thornhill also read it. We did a live about it, which is up on our YouTube. We did a live in season 4 where we talked a lot about the Testaments. So everyone was kind of pointing us in this direction. Dr. Kristen read the Testaments. You're
not pointing us in this direction.
That Lydia does not jive with this Lydia that we've been given. And so in the AMA, Bruce was asked about it. And he said, Aunt Lydia definitely supports the goals of Gilead. He wrote goals in all caps, which is interesting. I think he was asked about her goals. But as a society, she is trying to make her way through, survive, thrive, acquire power and protection, and make a difference in the course of humanity. So, I mean, spoilers a go-go, y'all. If you're watching this, you're going to get spoiled. In the Testaments, we find out Lydia has been working to take down Gilead for quite some time.
Yeah. And uses Hannah and Nicole to do it.
Right. So, how are they going to tell the Testament's story without changing that based on the Lydia that they showed us in this season? Because I agree with Bruce Miller. She is about power and protection for herself. But I think, like Fred, she's a true believer.
Yeah, and the one in the books was a federal judge before Gilead happened, which is not the one in the show.
I think she was a school teacher or a counselor or something. She did something with school kids in the flashbacks we've gotten.
Somebody described the Testaments as Handmaid's Tale fan fiction, and they're not wrong. I think it was one of our viewers. They're not wrong. That's what it is.
Except it was written by the original author.
Except it was written by the original author. Yeah, this is, my kingdom for an honest conversation with Margaret Atwood about this show.
Oh, I would pay all the money in my savings account for that.
He also talked about Janine and said something really interesting. Didn't
he?
He made the argument that Janine is really smart and has a plan, which I don't find a lot of historical evidence. Not that she's not smart, but I don't find historical evidence of a plan.
No. So he said, Janine definitely has a plan for Esther, for herself, for Lydia, for Ruth, who I think is the other aunt. The one that keeps dissenting with Lydia. I could be wrong on that.
The snarky Paul one. The
snarky one, yeah. And surviving. Janine is so smart and she has learned so much. She has a plan about everything. Now, I believe him about that. If you look at Janine that, got left in Chicago by June. June couldn't find her. We know that. I wasn't accusing June of that. But, June took her to Chicago and then disappeared. Janine wakes up and she is back in the Red Center. If I was Janine, I'd be real effing mad. And I would start planning. Because that's when they're on the milk transport. That's one of the things she yells at June about is June's lack of planning.
Yeah.
That is something that was brought up many times in the season from everyone else's perspective. Moira's, Emily's, Janine's. June is not a planner. June is reactionary. And so I believe that. Has Janine always been a planner? I don't think so. Have they shown us a Janine that has always been smart and calculating? No.
No, and that's been a lovely thing, actually, because you've shown us a June that is calculating. And so to have Janine have other qualities was a lovely tonic.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So speaking of Janine, let us talk about the other handmaids, former handmaids in June's life, the Moira and Emily of it. We don't get a whole lot of Emily.
No, but very, very interesting. But what we do get of Emily is massive because it's this. We don't get to see her wife because of COVID, but we do get a conversation that things are still hard. What we get is that she was very good about setting boundaries about who she did and did not want to see. She did not want to see the aunt that cut off her clitoris, understandably. And then June forced her to see this person and confront this person. And that I think that episode caused a lot of discussion among us and among those of you who viewed about Emily's response to June and if she really was trying to get it back in June's good graces or what was going on. But then at the end, we see her playing a pretty decent role in the murder of Fred Waterford.
And she's present in episode 10. She's friends with June. Their relationship seems to be fine. So I think the interpretation that a lot of us made that Emily was pacifying June at the end of the episode involving the aunt was apparently not what the show thought was happening.
No, the show thought what she was speaking was her truth, which is not how we believe Alexis Bledel played the scene. So she's we should pause here for a moment and say that one of the things that we said consistently throughout all of season 4, if this is the first time you're joining us, is that they obviously never read a single book on trauma therapy or trauma survivors or survivors of sexual assault or anything else. And yet in the AMA, Bruce Miller claims that they researched it really heavily. And I think we had to put down the computer and howl with laughter because I'm certified in trauma therapy. Nadine is certified in trauma. Like, we've all done a lot of trauma therapy, and I'm certified in trauma-informed care. Like, no. And if they did, and they then, if all of June's actions are trauma responses, there are ways to make it clear that they're trauma responses that they did not do.
No. And I think, if you've watched our coverage of this show before, we're not fans of the way that they assume a level of knowledge that they don't really do the work of showing the work of how they got places. They just go places without having shown how they got to the end of that equation. And this is one of those where we needed a lot more evidence that they had thought this through, that they had in fact researched trauma and conflict survivorship and what that looks like, because that's not what we believed we were shown, and they clearly felt they showed it to us. So Emily was a bit of a puzzle in this season. Moira, also a puzzle in a slightly different way, but more consistent in her development. She is honest about June. We loved it. We got some of the best honest lines about June from Moira in this season.
Yep.
And the beautiful conclusion that we came to at the end of Vows was that, Moira is the person that knows June the best.
Yep.
She is the person that can hold her accountable. She is the person that June feels like she can be most vulnerable with, which is why we don't get June's confession about failing as a mother by leaving Hannah until she sees Moira.
Yeah.
So, Samira Wiley and Elizabeth Moss on the tugboat scene was just magic. Those two are so good together. We missed not having them play off each other. We get less of it in Canada, although I did love the scene where Moira and Emily and June and Rita all sat around talking trash about Serena. But Moira is decidedly not at the murder scene for Fred. She is pushing June in episode 10 to go to Geneva and to push for prosecution of Fred Waterford. But she's not on board with this scheme, which I think, where does that leave us for season 5? Really interestingly, I think. We don't see her when June comes back from killing Fred. It's just June and Luke and Nicole. So I'm really intrigued as what they're going to do with Moira. Hopefully they are too.
Yeah.
We didn't get a lot of questions about Moira in the AMA. We didn't save any of them because there weren't a lot of people talking about Moira, which I think is a shame because I think she's one of the more interesting characters as a survivor of both being a handmaid and a Jezebel.
Yeah. Briefly, let's touch on Luke, who is confusing.
Luke is confusing, yeah.
And we think a lot of his confusion may be COVID casualty.
I think so. I think they probably had a lot more Luke stuff filmed and they had to cut it.
Yeah, and so he was a boomerang a lot. We didn't really understand some of his motivations. Obviously, he's motivated to get Hannah back, which is great. But then there's this scene, this very snarky scene. He seems to be very patient with June, and then the next episode is kind of telling her to get over things. Luke is in trauma as well, and we have no evidence that he has been given any resources.
Yeah.
To deal with his own trauma or to welcome back a traumatized spouse.
Yeah. And so that was
just confounding.
Yeah, that was further evidence to us as the lack of trauma informed research that they had done because of the way that Luke's character was treated and the way that their relationship, they were allowed to just like cohabitate with little therapy and no reintegration training. Because there's a lot of emotions.
Yeah.
She's been gone for 7 years. It used to be 5 years, but then, Bruce told us in the AMA that he sucks at recalling.
Yeah, which was an interesting thing to hear from a showrunner.
Just write it down, buddy. We have notes apps for a reason. But yeah, I think yeah, Luke left us very confused. Obviously, he's going to be in season 5, and we're not sure what they're going to do with him and Nicole and Moira. But speaking of June's partners, what we do have more things to say about is
his eyebrows.
Is Nicholas. Yeah. Boy, did he have some interesting stuff happening this season. Some great scenes with him and Brad Whitford. Mm-hmm. Lawrence and Nick together was just like magic. I really enjoyed that. I hope they do more of it in season 5. But there's still a lot we don't know about our Nick.
Things we do know, he's now married.
He's married, y'all.
And still enough in love with June to commit treason against Gilead.
To do literally anything she asks.
On potentially 3 occasions?
Uh-huh.
So that's Nick.
Nick, yeah. We did get some interesting AMA stuff from Bruce Miller about Nick. That's worth picking up. We know from our devoted YouTube fans that in the past they've had, he was missing almost from an entire season because he had another filming commitment. We know that a lot of Nick's stuff gets cut.
Yeah.
We don't know why.
Why it doesn't go up on Hulu as a web series.
As an extra. So we know that they want to focus on Nick a lot. We get him and June as like the love story of this show in this season, which we found emotionally manipulative and confusing. But Bruce said 2 things about Nick. First one, that his motivation is survival.
Right.
His own, June's, and the life of his child. I think that was real clear, especially when he shows up and meets her at the Catholic Church, has the file, did all the research on finding Hannah in Colorado Springs. I think he doubts there will be a long term at all. I think Nick thinks he's not getting out of Gilead. I agree. Alive. And Bruce said his belief in any aspects of the Gilead revolution have long since faded. I think they left the moment Gilead took over violently, which is possible. We don't know a lot about Nick at the start of Gilead. We do know that he was involved because Serena told us. And Bruce did say in the AMA that they hope to explain Nick's involvement in the rise in Gilead. We've had stories written, even filmed, but we alas had the moments did not fit into the episodes. He thinks Serena was being honest about Nick's involvement and reputation as a Gilead founder. Of course, she was also trying to make June feel bad. Yeah, he says Nick found true love in his mind with June, and I agree with that. Not sure how June feels about Nick aside from loving him. They made that very clear in those episodes. But yeah, to me, Nick is one of the most fascinating characters they don't talk about enough. So I really hope they find time to actually fit him into the episodes.
Yeah.
In season 5.
So now we need to talk about June. And there's a part of me that just wants to say like the following sentence, and that's all we say about June.
Go.
Even though she is the thing that Bruce Miller has built this entire show around, he has never done the work to make her a functional person.
Yeah.
All of her stuff this season is plot driven, not character driven.
All of it.
Even when it fits with her character, it's almost accidental sometimes, or it is a regression to somebody else she once was. Her repercussions of her actions are never dealt with by her, which is not how humanity works.
No.
There are some brilliant acting things that Elizabeth Moss does. She plays her brilliantly. But many of them, and I will say, like, there's this one scene where she talks about, like, I failed because I couldn't bring Hannah home. But why that was so pressing in her mind is a rewrite of existing show history. So it was all very confusing and all very Handmaid's Tale. Like June's Teflon, she's going to survive it all because Bruce Miller is more interested in telling a story about June than telling the story the rest of us think he's telling. And he said that several times in interviews this season, that June will survive because it's her show.
Yeah.
And it didn't have to be, but because he made that choice, we sacrifice really fascinating things about Nick or really interesting things about Serena. I would have loved, again, we've said this before, I would have loved if June died at the end of season 3 and seasons 4, 5, and 6 were about Moira and Emily. Because that's still a Handmaid's Tale. So all of that is that. So we can talk about anything else, but for me, like, that's what I want to say about June. That's all you need to know.
Yeah. And I think it's a case of just being really frustrated at the potential for what her story could have been. And at this point, we've just racked up so many inconsistencies in storytelling and plot development and character development that it's hard to see past that. We can certainly see individual moments of brilliance. I agree with you. That testimony scene was phenomenal. The scene where she was driving away from from Nick in the magic Subaru.
Yep.
The scene where she screamed at Serena, the scene where she screamed at Tuello. Like, I don't know what Scientology magic Elizabeth Moss has going on, but it is powerful. But so much of this season for June was so erratic in a way that wasn't explained. And we've often said, if you've watched our previous season coverage, the show makes us do too much work to figure out what they're doing. We don't need to be
that's the summary. That's the summary of our feelings.
We don't need to be told everything. We, in fact, like a lot of shows in which we aren't told minute by minute what's going to happen. But there's a difference between that and not having a show Bible and not writing down details and being consistent. And we love talking about this show. We love analyzing it. But the lack of consistency is just what makes June so difficult. Yeah, I think that's all I've got to say, really, is that's not this. They think they're telling us a different story than they are, and we have to do way too much work to square the circles.
And so here we sit. If you watch this right before season 5, we are as confused probably about what's going to happen as you are, but hopefully we've gotten some trailers. We've gotten intel that the Israeli trailers are actually the best ones. So if you are into more clarity than Hulu gives, make sure to look up the Israeli trailers on YouTube. Whenever you're watching this, there are 2 ways to ingest our Handmaid's Tale recaps. One is here on the YouTubes. Another is here on a podcast. So if you are watching on YouTube, please also join us on the podcast, The Culture Cast, which is where we talk on Mondays and Fridays about cultural analysis from a popular culture perspective. And on Wednesdays, we talk about cultural analysis from a lived culture perspective. And if you're joining us on the Culture Cast, also join us over on YouTube, where you can see our facial expressions of incredulity whenever we're talking about June. And also observe our incredible collection of Funko dolls behind both of us. But however we are in relationship with you, we are grateful for you. We are excited to talk about Handmaid's Tale and other things like The Crown and Glow and Hallmark Christmas movies and the historical context of American exhaustion. All of these things are things we want to talk about with you, and we're grateful you're along for the journey.
All of these things we will talk about. If you are watching this as it airs on the YouTubes, next up for us is we're taking a little brain break from the dystopian horror show that is The Handmaid's Tale, and we're going to talk about The Falcon and the Winter Soldier. I love Marvel. Dr. Kristen loves Marvel, all caps. We have a lot to say about what happens in The Falcon and the Winter Soldier. We're excited to talk about it in an analytical space because we talked about it a lot when it aired. So if you're on the YouTubes and you enjoy the Marvel, or you just enjoy us, make sure and join us in the next few weeks, as we'll be doing an episode by episode discussion of The Falcon and the Winter Soldier. And if not, we'll see you whenever we see you next.
If you liked this video, please give us a thumbs up. It really does help the algorithm. If you loved our conversations, please subscribe and hit that bell so that you don't miss anything we're doing. It's a lot more than just TV recaps and lived cultural analysis. We've got a lot of other things going on, and we'd love for you to join us on YouTube. If you're listening on the podcast, please like and subscribe on Apple Podcasts especially, or on the podcatcher of your choice. No matter what, tell your friends, tell your neighbors, tell your mail carrier, send out carrier pigeons. Please tell everybody who you think should be involved in these conversations that we want to talk to them about it too. Find us on social media or on our website and remember to spell Abby with an E, and you'll be able to find us anywhere. We'll talk to you guys later.
Take care, everybody.